Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm sharing with you a card that I made that's just right for St. Patrick's Day. I'm going to be using the stamp set from Craftin Desert Diva. This one's called Pot of Gold, and I'm going to slightly modify one of the stamps. The stamp that I'm going to slightly modify is that first one, and I'm just going to modify that rainbow. In the original form, the rainbow ends sort of in a point and it doesn't extend too far past. In my mind, the way I wanted to create this card was as if she was sliding down from the rainbow. So when I stamped it, I just wiped off the end of that rainbow, and I'm gonna hand draw that in and change it to how I want it. I'm also gonna stamp out the little troll boy, St. Patrick's Day boy, and the little bird. And here I am just drawing in with my pencil first the extension of that rainbow. And it doesn't matter, the edge of it, it doesn't matter how it looks because I'm gonna have that covered up. Once I drew that in, I just erased that. I could still see the faint lines. And then I'm taking my EK Success journaling pen, and I'm just gonna draw that right in. This is a Copic friendly pen, and that's what I'm going to use to color in those images. So there's a closer view of what it looks like, and I'm going to jump right into the Copic coloring. I did leave the coloring in for this one. It's just one card and it didn't take too long. I'm trying to remember to put the caps on the screen so you could see what colors I'm using, but I think I do forget again. And so I will have a list of all of the Copics that I used on my blog. But typically what I do is I start with my very lightest shade and I just add that to sort of wet the paper. I think it helps me to blend a little bit smoother when I do that. And so that's typically what I'll do. Then I'll go in with my very darkest shade and add the shadows. For this little girl, I'm drawing in some pleats with my very darkest Copic marker. And then I'll use lighter shades to keep blending those out. Skin, typically I use between 4 and 5 shades. Again, I'm using my very lightest color and I wet the paper, and then I go with my darkest marker and I add shadows. And I'm not too worried at this point about the light source. I'm just adding shades. I'm adding different shades so that I can create some dimension. And then I'll blend that out with the lighter marker. I go in with an R20 to add some color to her cheeks. And then I'll just continue blending out the each layer. Now, I think I left just the coloring of this little girl in. I didn't leave the other one in because I do the same thing. And I forgot to color in her little headpiece. So I go back in and I do that. And I left the coloring in for his hair because I did color them in just slightly different. His, unintentionally, I made a little bit darker than hers. And so I wanted to show you that. Now I've been trying something new with hair because that was one area that I struggled a little bit with, and I've found recently that if I color lightest to darkest, I get much better results. I seem to get a little bit heavy-handed when I'm adding the darkest colors if I don't lay that lightest foundation down first. I'm very visual, and so when the darkest shade is against the white paper, it seems like I have a lot more area to cover than what I actually do. So I've recently figured out that this way works a little bit better for me, and I've been getting some really good results, so I'm gonna continue sticking with it. So her color, I'm using the same shades. The only difference is I don't add that very last darkest shade for her. And these are kind of tiny images. I'm trying to be very conscious of that when I'm adding the hair flicks in. And I think my YR07 is just very juicy, and so I take both of the caps off because the air pressure then balances out, and I don't have the big blob of color that leaks out sometimes when those markers are overfilled. So I continue coloring her shoes, and I use all of the same shades for both of the characters. Like I said, the only difference was I went a little bit darker with his hair. And then I used some dark N color. For the life of me, the name escapes me. But I'm coloring as if it's black, and so I'm using relatively dark shades to color in that pot. And then I can start working on my coins, and I'm using just a couple of different shades of yellow to color those in. They're just really tiny, and I almost could have avoided used one marker. So once I have those colored out, I'm going to work on the rainbow, and I decided to stick with the red, yellow, green, and blue scheme. I kind of went very traditional. And so I'm using a couple of different shades, a few different shades for each strip of the rainbow. And I stuck that yellow right next to the red, and I was so worried that I was going to have some bleeding, because red is notorious for bleeding when it comes in contact with any other color that's light. But I think I escaped that this time. So I'm adding my green in, and I think I went just a little too dark, but I wanted to differentiate between the green in the rainbow and the green on her dress. So that was my intent. And then I can add a really bright blue. And that'll finish coloring this image. Now I did use my ScanNCut to cut all these out. And when I cut them, I leave a little border around. And I'll do this off screen once I'm done coloring in this little bird. And I just went with kind of neutral browns for him. And there's everything all colored in. So once again, I'll use my ScanNCut to die cut those out, and I'm ready to start working on the background. I've got a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock, and I've got, this is the MFT Cloud Stencil. I'm taking some Distress Oxide ink and Mowed Lawn, and I'm just creating green clouds. Since this is a very St. Patrick's Day inspired card, I guess in my world, the clouds where the leprechauns live is green. Now this panel is a little bit larger than an A2 sized card, but I will cut that down to fit an A2 size card base once I'm done. So once I have those on there, I do go ahead and use Lucky Clover, and I just darken up the edges just a little bit, just to give it some dimension. And then because this is a hybrid of pigment and dye ink, these Distress Oxides tend to stay wet a little bit. So I did use my heat tool just to kind of speed up that drying process before I smudged it or got my fingerprints all over it. And then I used a Hero Arts Infinity rectangle die to die cut that panel out. Also, I believe off screen, I did create another piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock, and I inked it up with Mowed Lawn, and then I used a Lawn Fawn Puffy cloud die to die cut some more clouds. Here I'm working on the sentiment, and I'm using a sentiment from the stamp set. The sentiment reads, "You're my pot of gold at the end of the rainbow." And then I've stamped that onto a piece of black cardstock that I treated with anti-static powder tool. And then I heat set that with white embossing powder. I've got that frame that I've die cut from a Craftin Desert Diva inside scalloped rectangle die, and I've just die cut that from white cardstock. I've attached the sentiment strip to the edge of that card, or to the frame, and then I can kind of start aligning my components together. There's that piece that I've die cut with the Lawn Fawn cloudy stencil, or puffy cloud, not stencil, die. And then I can just kind of line that up to the bottom edge and trim off any thin extra. Now here's my little girl, the one that I modified the stamp. And unfortunately most of it gets cut off, but it still looks like I want it to look. I wanted her to be coming down from the rainbow and kind of floating in the clouds at the end of that pot of gold. I've got the cloud, the puffy cloud. I've got that popped up on some foam tape. I've got the image of the little girl popped up on foam tape. And then I've popped up the little boy and the owl also on some foam tape and adhered them all down. And for some embellishment, I'm adding some glossy accents to the money so they can be nice and shiny. And then I'm using my Spectrum Noir glitter overlay pen to add some glitter, some sparkle to their hair and their outfits. So there's my completed card. I hope you enjoyed it. Please hit that like button if you did enjoy this video, as it helps me to grow my channel. And don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.